I was born in Corinth, Mississippi on July the 12th, 1911. I was named Anna after my grandmother, and my aunt insisted that I have her name as well, so I came along with the typical Southern name, Anna Maud Mahaffey. It was later, when I lived in New York many, many years later, that I was called Mahaffey, and now most people call me Mahaffey. My parents moved to Pontotoc, Mississippi because of my father's work when I was about 11 months old. My sister, who was only 16 months younger than I, was born in Pontotoc. And then we moved on to Memphis, where my father, like many Mississippi farm boys, coming from the country by the route I've just mentioned, was looking for a job, and as so many in those days, they found work on the Memphis Street Railway. My father was a conductor on the streetcar line. As a toddler, I thought that was really remarkable and enjoyed so much when occasionally we would go for a ride on the streetcar, and I with great pride would be thinking that my father was part of the operation of that car. My brother Eldred was born in Memphis, and then 10 years later than my birth, my younger brother Edwin was born in Memphis. So there are four children with my parents making up our family, which was a closely knit family. When we first moved to Memphis, we lived on Vance, and there were a lot of small houses. Very much, they were called tenements, but they were like duplexes, and they were very much like two shotgun houses put together to form a duplex. The neighborhood, of course, at that time was made for people who needed housing that was affordable, but it was not a slum at that time, which it has become more or less in the present time. In fact, most of those places are now gone. And after that, we moved. We lived in that area for the first until I was about 4 years old, and then we moved onto Carr Avenue, a street which still exists with the same houses. They've been kept up. Carr Avenue between Cooper and Diana. It's like a little cardboard, like a little postcard. All the houses have been restored, and it's a delight to go down that street. There are some new houses, but it's all made in the character of the old neighborhood. And then when I was about 6 years old, we moved to a street called Convent Avenue. It was the street that formed the eastern side of a plot that now is a shopping center. Piggly Wiggly and Home Depot are there. But at the time we lived on Convent Avenue, there was a Tennessee agricultural experimental field that took up about a square block, and then there was a high board fence around a Catholic convent, and we used to play on the side of the street that had a little embankment and trees, and we would look through the knotholes in the fence because we thought it was such a mysterious place. And it was about 1918 that we moved, and my parents bought a house on Edgewood Street, and I continued from the 3rd grade on into for Olive Grammar School and Lenox School, a school that is still exists. Architecturally, it was more interesting than most schools are, and it is now made up of condos. I enjoyed the art classes in school. There was a teacher named Miss Minnie Raines, whose who was a painter. I thought it was wonderful. She used to go to Maine in the summer to paint. There were not many schools that had art classes, to my knowledge, but I guess Miss Raines needed a job, and they hired her, and she was the art teacher at Lenox School. She had a wonderful little studio where there were a great many materials, and she used to let me come up there and we would sit and talk, and it was wonderful to become acquainted with a real artist during those years when I was in grade school. I graduated from grammar school at Lenox, and then I attended Central High School and graduated from Central High School in 1929. I was in Clara Snyder's art classes. She was a graduate of the Art Institute, encouraged me to go, and I was told about the school that had opened on Orleans and Adams. Miss Rosa Lee, I believe her name was, had donated the school with the director to Memphis, and they had many, it was a free art school, and I used to go there after school when I was still in high school, and on Saturdays I made my first jewelry there because it just happened someone wanted to teach jewelry, and they had a jewelry room, and we made jewelry using blowtorches. I can't believe that I ever got a flame hot enough with a blowtorch to make a piece of jewelry, but I still have the piece of jewelry to prove it. In the fall of '29 and spring of '30, I attended Art Institute of Chicago. The Depression had come along during that year, and although my parents wanted me to go back to school, it really was not possible, and I was the first to say, I will not go back, I'm going to get a job, which I did. My first job was in Lowenstein's department store selling Victrola records. And there was not much of a market for Victrola records in those times because radio had come in. I know people would come to the department where I was supposed to be selling records. It was the Depression, and they didn't have a lot of money to spend the way kids do now on records, so they would take the record into the sound booth and play it, turn it back in, come back another day to listen again rather than buying it. My sister had become a dental assistant and worked in the office of H.F. Middlecoff, and his brother, C.W. Middlecoff, also a dentist, was in need of an assistant, and my sister said to me, would you like to try that job? And I said, yes, I thought I would. So it was a very pleasant 4 years that I spent as a dental assistant. My sister and I worked for Brothers, and it was a very pleasant atmosphere, in spite of the pain the patients might have felt from time to time. As an artist, or one who intended to be an artist, and with my interest in dress design, which I had pursued in a fashion after a fashion by doing my own clothes and making them and designing them and that sort of thing, I decided to go to New York. My mother was a wonderful seamstress, and she made our clothes. My sister and I had dresses which she made when we were little girls, and we always thought they were quite beautiful. In fact, I can remember some of them. My mother bought some of the same material, and it was a blue, a kind of not a dark blue, but a very, very blue, darker than the sky, but a beautiful color. I can still see it now in what we call crepe de chine. And she made it with deep Bertha and it had ruffles around the bertha, and then we had sashes of rose satin ribbon that ran through slots in the back and front of the bertha. You might not even know what that is. It's a kind of long collar, and back and front, and tied into a sash, a big kind of bow in the back. That's one of the dresses I remember. The dresses I made when I was a child, I would sometimes just cut out a newspaper pattern. I did make some of my clothes after the dresses that I've described that my mother made a little later on when she was much busier, and I'd been encouraged to do that, to do what I wanted to do in any kind of endeavor. I would sometimes cut out a pattern out of newspaper. Very crude, to tell you the truth, and I'm sure not terribly attractive. But I made some of my own clothes from before I was out of grammar school. And then in high school, I took the sewing courses from a very good teacher who encouraged me to design if I wanted to. I remember she told me in later years that some of the students had questioned whether or not my designs were very good, and she said, "That'll be all right. She will come, she will do it well someday." But I think that is when I first wanted to be a dress designer. Clothes had always attracted me. I remember during World War I remember a particular costume or dress, very much Victorian looking to us now, that my aunt wore, and I thought that was really quite beautiful. I always noticed people's clothes. I can't remember when I first started noticing people's clothes and liking the idea of designing clothes or admiring the design of the clothes that I was looking at. I decided to go to New York, which I did. I arrived in New York on my 24th birthday. Never regretted it. And jobs were very hard to come by. My mother had loaned me $100, which was, there weren't many $100 lying around in our coffers at that time, but I landed in New York with $100 and a need, of course, to get a job pretty quickly. I had various jobs the first year, sometimes something for 2 weeks. Once I know that they called the Evangeline, which was the girls' club where I lived in New York, wanting some people to work for 2 weeks on a WPA job. And usually you had to go on relief in order to get a WPA job, because this was really the very heart of the Depression. However, their need was so great that they wanted some people to do some clerical work for a few weeks, and I had one of those jobs. There were 3 shifts, and I was on the shift which got off at 11 o'clock. So I walked from 23rd Street down to 13th Street where I was living, and that was one of my first jobs in New York. I got a job at the Buttrick Pattern Company in the department where you take the designer's sketch, drape up the design, and then you, after it's approved, you make it up in muslin. You made it up in muslin, and then you had to draw the pattern very accurately with rulers and exact measurements. We did the original, which would go down to the grading department where they would make it up in sizes. I held that job for 4 years. And then I took off on my own designing clothes for individuals. It was great fun. I loved doing it, and the people liked their clothes very much. I did one-of-a-kind models, and they were made just as well as the dresses that I had made at Henry Bendel's. And I did that for a time. Although I wanted to design clothes, I was very interested in other art forms. I didn't limit my interest to that. And in school, I enjoyed all of the various assignments of whether or not they were designs or paintings or block prints or drawings. I think drawing is a very important part of an artist's life. You really should never stop drawing. And when I taught drawing, I said that to students. But of course, I often stop myself. I'll go for years without making very many drawings. I met my husband in New York, although he's a Memphian. And we met through a friend who had introduced us through letters and insisted that I call Richard White, his friend who was living there. I didn't call him for a long time, and James Morrison, our mutual friend, kept asking me in his letters why I had not called, so finally I called him. It so happened that I was attending a young people's group at First Presbyterian Church on the corner of West 12th Street and Fifth Avenue. Strangely, that's the place where he was also going, because the scholarship which he had won with the Guillemot Organ School, the school was in the church, was at the church, and he was working there, and had been there many times when I was there, but we hadn't met. So we met in one of the rooms there. We arranged to meet there, and so we've been friends ever since. Friends and more as time went on. Before Richard was born, I was doing my own business and doing one-of-a-kind designs and dressmaking for individuals. But after Richard's birth, I gave that up, and I really spent my time taking care of him. And we did things like, I took him out twice a day and did the carriage thing, and we really discovered New York. When we moved to Memphis, I really was involved very much for the first few years in civic things in Memphis. John Spence and I organized the Better Schools Committee, and I worked very hard with that group. I'd become interested in early childhood education when our own child was in preschool in a private school in New York. It was a private school with public interest, however. And here in Memphis, we were very concerned about low teacher pay, school dropouts. It sounds like it was written today because we have the same problems. Overcrowding, I think we have less overcrowding now. Teacher salaries, we were very interested in getting raised. We had a lot to do, I believe, with the public becoming interested in finally getting the county tax divided on a per pupil basis. For a long time, it was divided on simply half and half. The county government said, your half and my half, so the city only got half, though it had the much larger system. And we did a number of things. We worked not against the school board or the organization of the school superintendent and the board, but we did have, where we felt there were needs for improvement, we let it be known to them. Then I worked with others when Myra Dreyfus revived the Mental Health Society. I was on their board, and worked with them and other organizations like that. The Preschool Association, which Peggy and Wilka Dunham had organized, and they were very concerned about better preschools. This all sounds like today. I think we helped in those times. However, I decided that that was not what I was really about, that I was an artist. And by this time we had another child. Our children are 10 years apart. But I was able to take time to go to the Memphis Academy of Arts and take single classes. I would take one class at a time one studio course at a time. That's all the time I could afford to be away from home. But I always worked for credit. I felt it was like money in the bank because I thought maybe sometime I'll apply as a candidate for a degree, and that's what I did. I had a very special relationships with my teachers. Phyllis Tickle was there and taught the academics, and Phyllis and I were good friends. I've seen her many times since then. As you know, she has had a great career as a writer and as a lecturer and is really a wonderful person, and I feel privileged to have had her. She taught freshman English, which I took because I had no college courses of that nature. And I said to her, "Phyllis, I'm taking freshman English and I really need it." And another person who of course meant so much to me was Georgia McHenry, with whom I took jewelry. And we became very good friends. In fact, during Georgia's later years, when she was living at Tresvant Manor, I used to visit her from time to time, and we kept up our friendship until the time of her death. And that was my major subject, and we formed a very close relationship, but she was a wonderful teacher. I did take some sculpture classes where I've used the torch a few times, but and I enjoyed the sculpture course, but actually my emphasis was on making jewelry, though I spent a lot of time in the pottery department, and I did make a lot of pottery, and from time to time I do make pottery now, but I only do slab pieces. I don't throw on a wheel. So I did apply for candidate for degree and finished with a major in metal smithing, which for my purposes meant jewelry. My jewelry was shown after I graduated. Actually, one of the first shows, the Academy had a show for its graduates. It's called, from people from my class, they asked 5 people to exhibit, and they had a show at the Memphis Academy of Arts for 5 years later. My work was shown then. It had been shown before at the League of University Women. They may not have said league. The University Women, their organization, sponsored the Mississippi River Crafts Show at Brooks for a number of years. I had work in their shows. I had work shown at Lemoyne-Owen, and then at Abingdon Square Painters, the New York group, which I've belonged to since I left New York, showed my jewelry once a year. The Abingdon Square Painters is a working studio group. It's a cooperative. And those of us who were ever part of the group are associate members. I'm probably the only one left, but they turn the working studio into a little gallery once a year, and they show the work of their members. And my work has been shown there always. I made one big necklace a year. I like doing big necklaces, as I call them, those that are constructed so that there are big pieces in it. And I did about one of those a year because I kept sending things to the Abingdon Square painters during those years. One show that I consider was very meaningful to me was one that Lon Anthony invited me to be a part of at Rhodes College, then Southwestern, in which Martha Christian, a weaver, and Lon Anthony, a sculptor and director of the art program there, invited me to show my jewelry, and I had a show there. It was part of a series I call the Creation Series, in which I took the 7 days of what I consider Genesis poetry. I'm not a creationist, but I think the story in Genesis is, I don't think it eliminates the evolution. As a matter of fact, I think the 7 days, even a Baptist preacher said when I was growing up, the 7 days were 7 periods of time. So I've always loved the poetry, the poetic story of Genesis and the creation, and I did the series day one, and there were different pieces. The creation series I made for that show, so all seven days were there. A number of those sold. In fact, the only one I have is the necklace I was wearing last night, and that's the first time that necklace has ever been worn. It was not sold, and I have kept it, but I didn't wear it myself, and it's just been put away, and last night I decided I would wear it. I'm no longer making jewelry, but I would like to do it again sometime because it was very satisfying. I did that after I graduated in my home studio for quite a number of years, and still continued after I started working at Shelby State Community College. One of the reasons I felt that I needed to go back to school is that I wanted to work again, and I wanted to do something with art, and teaching seemed to be, I'd never wanted to teach before, but I thought I really might enjoy teaching, and that seemed to be a real possibility for me. I got a master's in continuing education, and because I had done so many different things in my life, what I call reincarnations, in my resume I described them all, and I described all the things that I had done that I had been doing not for pay during those years when I worked for 1 or 2 goals with organizations, and then going back to school. I put everything in that I'd ever done, and even though my master's was not in art, it was attractive to Shelby State at that time. They were having, most of their teachers were younger teachers, and the background that I had had interested them, and so I did start there as a professor because they gave me some credit for what I had done. And when I retired as associate professor. But during those years, they were very important years in my life. I was in my 60s when I began to teach, so there were not so many years there, but they were very important and very active years. The school was just getting started. In fact, the art department was more or less on paper. So we were limited again in the space that we had, but we began to build an art department. Another person who was teaching there, and she too was a sculptor. She had come in after I suppose when the sculptor became ill, but she taught art appreciation. That was Anna Woodson, who is now married and known as Anna Woodson Williamson and lives in North Carolina. Patty Lickman was there, and I've forgotten the name of the painting teacher, but we worked together, the art staff, on proposing classes, and we finally were able to build what was a very nice art department. I wrote the jewelry courses. Patty did the pottery. They had a fine art. They had a nice pottery department, and then Pat Foley came on as a painting teacher. We had 2 painting teachers by that time, and they brought in someone to teach photography. So we were able to put together enough classes, and the school was interested in seeing those classes develop. Now, in later years, they had to drop most of them because they had other concerns, and students had needs of such a nature that they could no longer carry them on. But that was after I left, and those were very important years in my life. We would have 2 studio classes and 3 art appreciation classes, and all of us in the art department enjoyed the art appreciation classes. It was very much a part of teaching art, we felt. And one of the rewarding things about teaching the art appreciation, in which most of us use slides as a basis for our lectures, one of the things that we did that I think all of the teachers who taught art appreciation would require that the students make a gallery trip. It was not a class trip. They did the trips on their own. They would choose something to write about, and they would write about it, that particular picture or piece of sculpture, whatever they chose to write about. And I thought it was the first time that many of those students had been to gallery. I believe they still do that in the department. They still have art appreciation taught at Shelby State, and I think they still require that students make a gallery trip on their own, choose something to write about, and write an essay on that particular piece. I enjoyed teaching drawing very, very much. And
why was that?
Well, I think drawing is very basic to anything you're going to do in art. And I don't always follow my own advice, but I always said to students, don't ever stop drawing. And it was rewarding most of the time when you stand before a drawing class for the first time. Most of the people will say, I can't draw a straight line. I can't draw. And I usually would ask, well, can you write your name in cursive? And of course everybody could do that. And I said, if you can do that, you can draw. After all, you're drawing when you write your name. But I found that, and I would say as well, if I set up a still life of some kind, some flowers or some pieces of pottery or something for people to draw, that they could take liberties with that, with the arrangement, rearrange it as they might in their drawing. And if they complained it doesn't look like, I would say often, well, this is God's leaf. Make yours just as original. I did encourage originality, and the importance, when you're drawing, you can do so much with line itself. If you take a pencil and you're drawing with something, you can make it thick or thin or dark or light, and it's part of that makes it a work of art. And that only comes with the person who's behind the pencil or whatever it is. I often would use a great many materials rather than just pencil or pen. People could have chalk or markers or draw in watercolor. And often I would have them make make at least one instrument themselves to draw with, like taking a piece of cane and making a pen, or creating something to draw with themselves. I liked very much teaching printmaking as well, because I've done a bit of printmaking. In fact, I've had a few pieces exhibited of prints as well as jewelry. And we did linoleum cut, which is very easy. We did wood cut, which is a little less easy. It's a little bit more complicated, but not terribly. And we did etchings, though we had at Shelby State to borrow one of the labs where they did other things, because the ventilation for using acids was not good enough in the studio, and so I arranged with the other department where they used acids and things in their work, that we could come in at one time or another and etch the plates, because of course you use nitric acid when you're etching plates, and that's you have to be very careful when you are working with things like that. At Shelby State, it was very challenging for me when the first day I went into class and realized that many of those young men in that class, and our classes were large these were not studio classes, these were art appreciation and humanities, had just come back from Vietnam. And Vietnam, to me, was one of the horror stories of our time, a war which I protested, which I believe never should have been, and was a great travesty. I cannot find the words to tell you how dreadful I thought the whole thing was. And standing before those young people who had gone through all of that tragedy and were coming to get an education really made me feel that I had a job to do. I retired in 1981 from somewhere around the mid-70s till 81, 7 or 8 years. I've forgotten the exact dates. I've got them in there somewhere, but I won't stop the conversation to go and look up the numbers, because that was roughly the time. But they were very meaningful. One worked very hard. I enjoyed not only the teaching, I enjoyed working on the curriculum committee, which I was on for a number of years. That meant that you listened to the proposals for courses that were being introduced, including my own. I wrote the 2 jewelry courses. And but before it was over, I taught drawing, I taught design, and I taught printmaking. Printmaking is the reason I'm interested in photography. I think of course, a photograph is a print, and it's, from my point of view, simply another technique of making prints. And I believe that's why it interested me. But after I retired, Patty was teaching, they put in a photography class. They'd had one for continuing ed, but they put in a regular photography class. And they had dropped the jewelry classes, they had dropped the pottery classes, and they kept the painting and drawing and Patty's photography classes. Later on, they dropped some of the others, but she continues teaching photography. I took the first 2 courses. As I said, I retired as associate professor, and I had come back as a freshman because I wanted my work to be graded, and I wanted to see how it stood up with other students. But since that time, I really began to do photography very seriously, and I have audited the course. I still audit the course, and I still learn some things, and it's wonderful to have Patty Lichtman to look at my work, because I like very much to have somebody take a professional look at it before I count it as a piece in my body of work. I work with just a shot camera, just a straight shot with a little, it has a projector on it that I can lengthen and shorten, and that's useful. But I use a small camera with that I don't really manipulate all the light and dark things. I've said it's the eye that creates. And when I'm taking a picture, I try to see it whole. In fact, I'm doing the same thing I might be doing with a drawing or any other thing that I create. I'm seeking something that's already there. It's all finished and there, but I have to use my eyes very creatively to see exactly where it is, and to have the camera take just that and not something else. I like to do things that I'm not going to crop. I do trim pieces, and occasionally I've cropped a piece, but most of the time I see it whole and develop that from edge to edge just as the picture is taken. Many of my photographs were taken somewhere in Horse Cove, which is like a little saucer at the bottom of some mountains in Highlands, North Carolina. And you're surrounded by mountains. You're still high, but you go down a very winding road down the mountain to this little cove where they hid horses, I believe, during the Civil War. That's why it's called Horse Cove. It would be hard to get to. It would have been in those days. And we rent a house and we just pretend we live there for a month or 2 weeks or however long we're there. And there's a creek that runs through that area, and many of my photographs have been along that creek, and many of them even from the just nearby where the porch where we're sitting. I did a series of photographs that I used as called well, I've forgotten the name of it. It was a result of the Celtic trip, and we started out in we landed in London, took a plane to Glasgow, and then from there on we were on buses. And he had made wonderful stops. We stayed in delightful little places. And we spent 3 days on Iona, which is one of the most wonderful places. I would love to go back. It's so peaceful. That's where St. Columba was for a long time. That's where he took off from. Where the Irish priests left from to go to Scotland. And then we followed that trail of the Irish saints across that part of Scotland. We went to various, I can't think of all the places we went to, but they were really exciting, and I got a lot of pictures, enough to make, because I'm very selective. I take really many pictures that have no use at all. I'm sure you understand that. But out of it I was able to get enough for the series, and they showed it for my 90th birthday, and that was 3 years ago. I hope I can keep up for a while longer. The Salmagundi Club is, I really know very little about it. It's a New York club that has to do with the arts, and they have, one of the Abingdon Square painters was on their board or a member or in some way connected, and when she saw one of my photographs that I brought to Abingdon Square Painters, she said, "Oh, we're having a photography show. This should be in it." And she got me to fill out a form. I said, "Suppose I don't make it?" She said, "I'm on the board, it will make it." So I did show in one of their photography shows one year at the Salamagundi Club. Some friends got together and bought a piece for Brooks, which was taken at Brooks, and it was a very abstract piece. It was taken in the old Camellia House, which no longer exists, and it was really, the sun was very bright outside, and coming through the slats, it made a wonderful pattern. And I did 2 of those, so they gave those to Dixon. Of course, they asked if they would accept them, which they did. I don't know how they use them, or whether they ever have them up, or whether they're up in somebody. I know nothing except they accepted them. Oh, I've done I've done 2 different studies in which I have, I take four of the photographic content that I've decided upon and that are identical, and 2 of them are reversed. Turn the film over and develop it from the back. And then I put those together, and it forms an abstraction of its own, depending on what you've chosen. And I choose them so that I'll get something abstract. And I call them Riddle, Riddle, Marie, I See Something You Don't See. It's a game that we used to play, and I played it with our children when they were little. But that's, you can see so many things, at least I can. Each person who looks at that will see something different in it. The little objects, sometimes they look like little cherubs, and then sometimes they might look like knights fighting. I like to think of what has happened over time in the lives of people and in places. And I photographed the place where the house used to be with whatever there is now, and then I took a picture of an old snapshot where we were sitting as children, as little children, but on the steps of the house, so part of the house is there. So I superimposed those as a kind of stream of consciousness, kind of what's happened over time. But a lot of it comes from what you imagine, because I think as an artist, I think most artists are always seeing things, so to speak. You might not admit it in just that way, but you're fashioning imaginary things a lot of the time. The best thing about being an artist, I suppose, is that you have a direction that is very close to you, that you have an urge to follow, and that if you do follow it, there's great satisfaction in it, even if you do not create a great body of work. And actually, in all of these things we've mentioned, I haven't created a great body of work. I mean, so numerous that you'd have a hard time thinking about this or that, or what you had done, or how many of them. It hasn't been an overwhelming kind of production, but it's been very enjoyable. And it's something, if you're committed to it, you must do it.